else. While we're doing the subcommittee, I think I put this on your desk. I need to go on the PowerPoint. It's on the shared drive. These numbers in, totals, commission. Everything else is fine, but this is a breakdown.
Oh, you want the
percentages, so I'll need that for each, that's for both sides. All right.
you don't mind. It feels like a little line.
Not ideal, but you know.
Rob, actually, can I have a table from your area? Just so I can get a little higher. Yeah.
Member Connors.
Present.
Member DeSmall.
Present.
Executive Director.
Present.
Legal Counsel Ray McCarthy.
Present.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Our agenda today is the board will hear a report from the executive director on election legislation submitted to the General Assembly during this 2025 session.
Honorable members of the Legislative Subcommittee, today I'm going to summarize to you the legislation that was submitted to the General Assembly both by the Board of Elections, the Secretary of State, and the City and Town Clerks Association, as well as just a brief overall summary of the number of bills introduced that are the early elections this year. There were a total of 58 election bills introduced in the General Assembly in total, compared to 62 bills last year. 21 bills were in the Senate, compared to 28 bills last year, and 37 bills were introduced into the House, compared to 34 bills last year. The summary document that you have before you will provide you with information on all 58 of the election bills and whether or not the bill was supported by the Board of Elections, if it passed the House and Senate, and if it was signed by the governor and the relevant dates to those. The BOE bills, which two of them are highlighted in purple on that Excel sheet there. Now, a total of 14 election bills passed the General Assembly this year, 7 on the House side and 7 on the Senate side as companion bills. This matches exactly the number of election bills which passed the General Assembly during the 2024 legislative session. The board voted to support all of the bills that I'm presenting to you that passed the General Assembly and that were signed into law. So first I'll start with the Board of Elections bills. There were 2 bills. That was Senate Bill 0815 and House Bill 5315. That's the tabulation of mail ballots. This act will allow the Board of Elections to tabulate mail ballots in local special elections in the same manner as it tabulates mail ballots in statewide elections. And this is, I'm going to go in order of the sheet. I'm also have them up here on the screen too, but I tried to stay in order within each category. So you only have to flip back when you go to the when you switch to the Secretary of State's bills and the City and Town Clerks Association, but they will be on the screen as well. This is a tremendous benefit for both the local board and the Board of Elections because this really makes it more efficient and secure to tabulate mail ballots in the same way that we tabulate mail ballots in statewide elections. And that did pass overwhelmingly, and that is in effect for this special election today. So we will be tabulating the mail ballots for the Coventry Council Districts 3 and 5 special elections. Previously, those ballots for that Coventry special election would have had to be packaged up, picked up by a Coventry police officer, sent to transported to Coventry after 8 o'clock. So we had to wait exactly until 8 o'clock to hand them over. And then the local board would have to open those and feed them one by one into a machine. Now that all happens here in the building. We tabulate them on a high-speed tabulator, just like we do for statewide elections. The second bill the Board of Elections voted to introduce was 5315. There was no Senate companion bill for retired election officials. That did not pass. This bill would allow retired election officials to work on a temporary basis up to 90 days in any year in which there was a statewide congressional or referendum general election that would be held. We got some feedback from different parts of state government on that. There was some talk of introducing it as part of another part of the statute, which specifically regulates, rather than have it placed in this section of the law, to put it in the actual section of the law, which regulates not just teachers, but various positions that are exempt from that. So we took that feedback and we are going to hopefully come back with that next year to recraft that and put it in that different section. So for the Secretary of State bills, there were 6 bills in total introduced by the Secretary of State. The Senate Bill 0729A and House Bill 5300, threats against election officials. That bill did pass, and this would consider election officials and poll workers as public officials for the purpose of the prohibition of making threats to public officials. So that law is in effect. The next bill is Senate Bill, jumping around here. The Senate Bill 0820 and House Bill 5515, which removes the voter registration deadline from the Constitution, which would have set up the possibility of same-day voter registration happening if that was approved by voters. That did not pass the General Assembly this year. The next bill is the Synthetic Media Bill, 0816A from the Senate and House Bill 5872. This did pass, and it would create the deceptive and fraudulent synthetic media in elections communication chapter, which would regulate the use of synthetic media in elections. The primary goal of that is to try to prevent what is increasingly happening nationwide, is where you have artificial intelligence generating the fake voice and video of elected officials or candidates, and that would prohibit that from happening in the state. The next bill is 0741 on the Senate side and House Bill 5831, which is moving the primary up to the first, basically is moving it up 1 week. However, in some years where that would actually fall, that Tuesday would fall the day after Labor Day, it would actually allow it to be done on a Wednesday, and that is to not conflict with early voting, which typically ends on the day before Election Day. So in order to not have an early voting end on a holiday, it would end on a Tuesday, and the Election Day would be on Wednesday if that conflict were to come into play. However, this did not pass the General Assembly. This is one of several attempts over the years to move the primary up by 1 week, and as many as a month, as much as a month in previous years, but did not pass this year.
Can I ask, is there any specific feedback that they provided around this?
There has been feedback, yes. When you sit in these committees, the General Assembly members have a lot of concern. For over the years, just listening to them, their concerns with it is they do not want to be campaigning while also gathering signatures, campaigning while the General Assembly is still in session. That is a big concern of theirs with the budget being passed, and with that conflicting with their responsibilities in the General Assembly. That's the primary concern that I've heard. I've also heard that they are very concerned about this happening in the summer, whereas the turnout in the summer is very low. They feel that if it was pushed up before Labor Day or even right after Labor Day, there is a concern that will drop turnout even lower than what it typically is. So you have those two factors with adjusting the calendar. In any event, at some point, something has to happen, as we say every year, because the Federal MOVE Act requires that military and overseas ballots be sent out 45 days in advance. And right now, we have to ask for a waiver each election. And at some point, you know, there will be you know, consequences or a lawsuit where the state will not be able to meet that deadline and be in violation of another feedback. But so far, we've been able to do it. The Secretary of State's office has been able to send those out, but it is a scramble after the primary to get them out by that deadline. The next bill is the Senate Bill 0953, which is House Bill 5514, which is mail ballots. That's from the Secretary of State. This act would exempt emergency mail ballots from the requirement to have certain wording mail ballots on the ballot. This is really just an improvement in the efficiency of the process, because as you know, early voting in Rhode Island is technically under mail voting still. And that being said, those ballots that were being used at early voting had to say mail voter, because the law said that any mail ballot had to have the term mail voter at the top. So in order to avoid that confusion with voters, that was removed. That requirement was removed from early voting ballots, and it also has the benefit of, if we would need to on election day move any ballots, if the polling place ran low on ballots, we would be able to take from that stock of early voting ballots, which are not being used anymore by election day, because early voting ends the day before election day. We could potentially use those ballots to supplement a polling place if they were to get dangerously low to running out of ballots. And that's a benefit for the conduct of the election as well. And that did pass. The next bill is Senate Bill 1072 and House Bill 6092, which is the online nomination papers bill the Secretary of State introduced. That did not pass. This would have made several amendments to provide for online nomination paper portal for election nomination papers. The next bill is the city and town clerks. Excuse me, we have two more. No, actually, we have the City and Town Clerks Association had 5 bills. They had 0513 on the Senate side and House Bill 5517, the increase of the precinct cap. This is a slight increase to the number of voters allowed in a precinct. So this is going to be a benefit to local boards of canvassers, because now if they do have some polling places that are near that cap, before they would have had to think about splitting and having 2 separate polling places. We feel that the polling places can handle more than 3,500, more than 4,000, more than 4,500, because so many voters are voting early and voting by mail. However, generally speaking, the state of Rhode Island is pretty conservative about increasing precinct sizes, and it's usually slow going. So this is just an incremental update, and I would suspect over the years that will continue to inch up as more people vote during that 20-day period, unless that 20-day period for any reason gets shortened. But right now, with that 20-day period of early voting, many folks are going to early voting rather than showing up at the polling place on election day. So that'll be a benefit for local boards who can avoid having to split a poll. The next is the permanent mail ballot list. That passed as well. That's Senate Bill 0520 and House Bill 5709. That modernizes and streamlines the existing process for getting on the permanent mail ballot application list. It actually removes the requirement that it be notarized, the application, because previously there was a hardship for folks who were in that category, needed a permanent application sent to them, and they had to have that request notarized, and that requirement has been removed. And this is not to actually receive a ballot. This is simply to receive an application to apply for a ballot, and that did pass. The next 3 bills from the Clerks Association unfortunately did not pass. Senate Bill 0521 and House Bill 5312, which is the local canvassing authorities. That would have established a process by which vacancies in municipal election offices and local canvassing boards are filled. It would have had a more formal process for that to happen. And that did not advance through the General Assembly. In Senate Bill 0522 and House Bill 5316 for write-ins, this would have required all write-in votes, regardless of qualification, to be reported and published by the State Board of Elections on its website. In addition to that, it would not have required the local boards of canvassers or the Board of Elections to tabulate write-ins unless specific criteria were met. That has evolved over the years. The board introduced that legislation for 4 years, and it's been introduced by the Clerks Association now for several years. And unfortunately, it did not gain any traction. There is discussions that, because we did have discussions with the ACLU, with the Clerks Association, to sort of insert some language in there that would make the ACLU more comfortable with it, as they have been in opposition, and they seem to be more comfortable with the newer versions of this. So it's potentially possible that in the next session, the requirement that our local boards and us tabulate all of these write-ins for Superman and Tom Brady, or used to be Tom Brady, but whoever it is now, and all these fictional characters not have to happen. It would only happen if there was no candidate, eligible candidate on the ballot, for example, or if the number of write-ins exceeded the number of votes for the candidate. I was actually in discussions at that national conference with the Vermont Secretary of State, and they actually passed a bill which is exactly almost the same as the bill that failed in Rhode Island, enabling exactly what this write-in bill would have done, which is limit the tabulation only to candidates in a contest where it was actually going to make a difference. But so next year, hopefully, the Clerks Association will introduce that again with those modifications, and it gets some traction. And the final bill from the Clerks Association is the publication of early voting hours. That's Senate Bill 0819 and House Bill 5518. This was really just a compromise to bring in line, rather than having to publish the polling locations and the hours and all that beforehand in this statute, which was established decades ago. It would have required that the local boards of canvassers actually publish the early voting dates and hours and times, since early voting is so much more popular. Not that they cannot do that now voluntarily; they certainly can do that. But it would have required them to do that in the newspaper, whereas now they're spending money in the newspaper to publish polling places, which are plastered all over the internet and on our website, Secretary of State's website. So this would have supplemented that requirement or replaced that requirement of publishing early voting hours, which the Clerks Association felt was a more efficient use of their resources. Unfortunately, that did not pass this General Assembly session. And then the final bill, which was not introduced by any of those three entities, was the extending the recount deadline, Senate Bill 0953 and House Bill 5514. This act would increase from 7 days to 9 days the period in time in which a request for a recount of the votes cast can be made to the Board of Elections. Now, this did pass the General Assembly. Now, the only issue with this bill is that it only applies, the change only was applied to local offices. Unfortunately, the statute, that there is a separate statute which applies to state offices, and the sponsors did not include state offices in this requirement. So we're going to reach out to, when we go through this process the next time, and either determine if the board wants to introduce legislation to do such, or if the sponsor wants to do it and introduce a piece of legislation to actually modify the state offices requirements. Because we don't want to have two separate requirements for state offices and local offices. It's just going to lead to confusion amongst candidates. So we'll look to get that passed in the next legislative session before the next general election and primary. And this concludes my report on the legislative election bills in the General Assembly in 2025. I'm happy to answer any questions from members of the committee.
My only question was going to be, well, thank you for putting together, but when would you like to start planning for the next session? As you mentioned, you're already thinking of one of the gaps that was found. So when would you like to start doing it again?
I mean, typically, it's always recommended that at least we have something preliminary in December. That way, after the holidays, we're ready to go for if there are any modifications by the board. That way, at the January meeting or meetings, we can approve, the board can approve any changes or final changes to legislation to be submitted, and then we can have it ready to be submitted by the legislative deadline, which is typically in early February, mid-February. So I think initially, we should have a list of or some bills in December, and get the board hopefully to approve or not approve them by the January meeting.
Any other questions? So do we have a motion to end our subcommittee meeting? No. So then we don't need it to separate.
You don't need it, you could do it.
Do we?
This is just a report being submitted.
Yeah.
And then we have it down for acceptance by the full board.
No. For the
Um,
next agenda.
It's on the agenda, regular agenda,
It's
yes.
in here as well. It's
Yes.
you can adopt it if you wish,
Sure.
but it's,
So does anyone have a motion to accept the report to share in the full meeting? Okay. Second, all in favor? Aye. Do you have a motion to end the subcommittee meeting? All right. All in favor? Aye. Yay.